Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. So glad to be here. Many years ago, the Creator decided that she wanted to give something beautiful to humanity, something symbolized as a light, but this beautiful thing was joy and freedom and peace and wisdom, and she wanted to place it inside of, well, wanted to give it as a gift to humanity, because she knew that it would be one of the greatest quests that humanity would ever embark on. So she gathered all the animals of the land and said, help me figure out where to put this light. And first, an eagle flew up and said, give it to me, and I will take it to the highest peak of the tallest mountain. Surely they would never get it there. And the Creator said, no, that won't work, for the humans are explorers at heart, and they will one day go to the tallest peaks of the highest mountains. And then a dolphin swam up and said, give it to me, and I will take it to the deepest depths of the oceans. And the Creator said, well, here's the problem. Humans are so innovative and resourceful that someday they too will go to the depths of the ocean, and they'll find it there, and it'll be too easy. And I want this to be the greatest quest of their life. And then a buffalo came up and said, give it to me, and I will take it to the farthest reaches of the Great Plains. And the Creator said, no, because humans love to wander, and someday they will map every inch of the land. And then an old blind mole popped his head above ground and said, why don't you place it inside them? For that's the last place they'll look. And the Creator said, it is done. And in the same way, some of the greatest gifts of our life, some of the most beautiful things that we get to experience, we can find within. Things like gratitude, things like our appreciation for beauty, and our ability to love unconditionally. And today we're going to explore some of those beautiful things inside of us. Now, I've been a personal growth junkie since before I was in puberty, since before I had armpit hair. And it started at the age of 12 when I read The 7 Habits of Highly Effective Teens. I think I was turned on to it by the fact that my mom somehow convinced me to read it, probably because I thought it was super cool that I was only 12 and yet had a book with the answers on how to be a teenager. I'm like, this is a serious shortcut. This is great. And from an early age, I learned things like how to be proactive, how to take responsibility for your life and not blame other people for the results in your life. Other things like seeking first to understand and then to be understood. You know, these are really helpful things to a 12-year-old. So I got hooked. I was like, wow, you can learn things, you can study wisdom that actually improves the quality of your life. And so from there, you know, as a teenager, I read How to Win Friends and Influence People, probably fueled by my need to be liked and approved by everybody. And that also led me to John Maxwell books on leadership. And from the age of 18, I started listening to, there I am, sexy, borderline husky young man, learning to, don't worry, yeah, I'm 18 here, so it's legal if you're attracted to that. Yeah, so from that early age, I started to listen to audiobooks and podcasts every time I jumped in my vehicle. It became a university on wheels. I attended conferences, workshops, seminars, you know, even as a teenager and for years after that, soaking up as much as I could get and trying to surround myself with people also seeking how to better their lives. For 2 years, I hired a life coach. And this picture is merely symbolic. He never touched my butt that I'm aware of. I also, when I was younger, I went to Panda Express a lot. And so I've read my fair share of fortune cookies. And in all this studying, I found that some advice is very specific to different areas of our life. And some advice is, you know, I created this kind of wheel to paint a picture. Now, you could divide up life into dozens of different categories. These 6 are just the ones that make sense from my model of a reality. So I have health, relationships, finances. I'm obviously going to use this laser pointer as much as I can, because how often do you get to use a laser pointer? Career, fun, and contribution. Again, we could make up any categories that we want, but I found these to be helpful. And sometimes the lessons you learn in each of these can cross-pollinate. Sometimes the things you learn about, if you learn to improve your relationship skills, that will help you in your career. And so sometimes those skills can help other areas of life. But that's not always the case. Learning to improve your overhead squat won't always help you reduce your overhead in your personal finance. Hashtag wordplay. But I did find that there were a couple core principles, some things that were foundational. And if we could grow in these areas, they affected every other area of our life. And there, again, could be more than 3, but these are the 3 I found to be most important. And the first is enjoying the present moment and learning not to be fixated in an ancient past or obsessing about a fictional future, but learning to be right here, to enjoy the people in front of you and learning how to truly embrace and experience the human experience instead of living in a world of thought disconnected from what's in front of you. And you can see how enjoying the present moment can help you improve your health. If you learn to enjoy the present moment instead of obsessing what you ate, obsessing over the cookie that you ate a couple hours ago, if you can learn to be present and say, I'm not a slave to my past, but I'm new in this moment, you can choose to have a salad. Your day isn't ruined because you ate a cookie. The past is the past, you're here in the present. So you can see how enjoying the present moment can influence all of these. Next is understanding your inner world. So it's learning to become aware of your thoughts and emotions and navigate your feelings and what causes those. And secondly, connecting to the wisdom within. The practice of pondering a little more and Googling a little less. How can we tap into the wisdom that's within us? It's so beautiful to learn from other people, but that's like drinking from a cup of water that they're giving you. It's a beautiful thing. But sometimes we forget that we have access to the same well that they do. Sometimes we forget to go to the well for ourselves and drink our fill. And so I found that if you can learn how to listen to your intuition, how to sit and think about things instead of always going outward for the answer, it can help all these different areas. And today, we have the pleasure of focusing on this one, understanding our inner world. And if I perform well enough, maybe I'll be brought back to do the other 2. That'll be fun. We'll see. But we're going to do that through the lens of mindfulness. And there's a lot of different definitions of mindfulness. Today, we're going to define it as simply becoming aware. And noticing our life. I've got a fun acronym for you. CTFAR. Cover thy face and rectum. Oh, sorry. Actually, that's a different training altogether. Today, it's going to stand for circumstances, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. Raise your hand if you've seen something similar to this in the past. Maybe you're familiar with how our thoughts affect our feelings and actions. Raise your hand if you've heard of this concept before. Okay, a few of you. Beautiful. Now raise your hand if you've played soccer before. So fun. Such a great sport. The real football. Okay, great. Now raise your hand if you're a professional soccer player. Okay. Yeah, we don't have any in the audience here today. So right there we can see that exposure is different than mastery. Just because something sounds familiar doesn't mean you've explored all of the possibilities. And that's what we're going to do today, is do a little exploring. Quick reminder, the 4 words that are most dangerous to your personal growth are, I already know that. It shuts down the learning centers of the brain. And it's simply true that what I have to say today is that's very bright. What I have to say today is far less important than what you're willing to hear. Whether it's from me, whether it's more importantly from the wisdom floating in the air, the wisdom within you, you may see something today that I've never seen before. So the question is not, do I have something impressive to say, but are you willing to see something fresh and new? So, what's my next slide? Okay, we're going back here. Circumstance, thoughts, feelings, actions, results. Who can guess? So if you've never heard of this concept before, I'll explain it quickly. Basically, a circumstance happens in our life. Some outward event takes place. And then we make up a thought about it. That's usually one sentence, and that can turn on to a run-on sentence. Circumstance, it could be something as simple, an example that's often used is someone cuts you off, in traffic. The thought might be, this person is a jerk and they don't respect anybody. This world is full of jerks and I don't like it. The feeling that comes from that is resentment, anger, bitterness. The action is you do your best not to let them in to traffic or whatever action stems from that. So when we feel a feeling, what it does is it narrows our menu of actions. It narrows, we still have a choice of what action we're going to take, but it narrows, it only makes a few actions kind of make sense to us in that moment. So when we're feeling resentful, our list of potential actions we could take becomes limited. So we choose from one of those actions and we get a result. And the result is maybe a fender bender, or they do eventually get in, but they don't let us in, whatever. We get some kind of result from the action that we take. Who wants to guess where we have the most influence in this equation? Yes? Your thoughts, absolutely. Beautiful. You can tell because it's a different color. So our thoughts, that's really where the formula changes. That's really where everything begins to shift. We can't control this circumstance, but we can change our interpretation of that. Now, as I was putting this together, it occurred to me, you might be able to argue that we can change things at the action level. And that's possible. If you're sitting on the couch feeling unmotivated to run, but yet you somehow find the willpower to go for a run, regardless of how you're feeling, that is possible. But it's only possible if you live in a world of thought where you can take action in spite of your feeling. So you can do that, but if you believe fundamentally, if you believe that I can't take action that's contrary to my feeling, if I'm feeling tired or lazy or lethargic, I can't just go and run. That's living in a world of thought. If you live in a world of thought that says, regardless of how I feel, oops, I'm really excited, regardless of how I feel, I can still take action. So we can see how many layers there are to this, how deep it goes, and why it's so important to remain open to fresh insight. So, question, how do you break the cycle of doing what you've always done? Any guesses? Yeah. Brad? Becoming aware. Awareness. Beautiful. Does that come up from the wisdom within you? Or maybe the last time?
I drank from your cup.
Oh, wow. So good. Absolutely. Awareness. This is such a beautiful word. We're going to fall in love with this word today and forevermore. So, and the reason is because you can't change what you don't notice. If we're blind to something, it's very difficult to influence it, to change the situation. Now, I want to make something very clear today. Today is not about thinking positively. This can often be misinterpreted that the whole point is to simply think more positively. That's not what we're doing today. What we typically label as positivity is only half of life. It is the yang, but we also need the yin. We need darkness. We need to mourn. We need to feel the full spectrum of human emotion. So today is not about only thinking positively. Today is about awareness. The invitation you have today is to become more aware of the stories you're telling yourself. So that's what we want to practice today. So it's not falling into the prison of I can't think anything that might be even somewhat negative. It's I want to become aware of the stories that I'm telling. And then from that place, I can choose whether that story is serving me or whether I want to tell a new story. So that's what we're practicing today. It's a lot like a movie. This gentleman is very invested in the movie that he's watching. Probably a lot of us have watched a movie before and been really invested in what was happening. Maybe it was a scary movie, and we forgot, to the point where we forget that it's actually a movie. And our heart starts beating faster. We're sitting on the edge of our seats. Our cortisol levels are rising because we didn't take ashwagandha that morning. And product placement sponsored by Organifi, green juice. And but then all of a sudden we get a text message from our friend, and maybe it's even a funny meme. And then we're pulled out of the movie. We stop feeling the anxiety of that movie, and we're directed towards this funny text. And our feeling immediately shifts because we're aware of a different story. We're aware of a different reality. And even when we go back to watching that movie, we're slightly less involved, we're less invested because we just became more aware that it's a story, that it's fictional. And in the same way, we become invested in our stories. And so the practice that we have here today is simply to become aware of the stories we're telling, and then you can choose whether you want to be invested in that story or not. The problem is not that we become invested in our stories, because imagine you are embracing a loved one and you suddenly become aware of, this feels really nice, and it feels nice because I believe this person truly cares about me. That's a beautiful story. Dive into that. You know, embrace it, feel that. There's nothing wrong with becoming emotionally invested in that thought. But if the thought is, well, this person hugged that person over there before me, they probably like them more. Catching yourself can be useful because you might not want to live in that story. You might want to make up a new one. So anyways, insert helpful example here. Let's see. Let's say, for instance, you become defensive anytime someone points out a possible flaw of yours. Today, and instead of, so you become defensive and your initial reaction is to find a flaw in them so that they don't have any moral high ground to stand on. Instead of maybe listening if there's a grain of, a grain of salt, grain of truth, a salt of grainy truth in there that you can maybe pull away from. Instead of that, you immediately put up your walls and you're like, well, you just pee your pants. Whatever their flaw is. You find something wrong with them instead of potentially listening to what they have to say. So let's put this through the model. And I learned this acronym through Brooke Castillo. Any Brooke Castillo fans out there? Yeah, I knew she was, so I'm leading her up. Yeah, so this is, I've heard this talked about a lot, but I find this acronym really helpful. And she calls this the model. And we can put any circumstance in our life through this. So let's say a lover, your spouse, maybe your roommate, brings up the fact that you forgot to wash your dishes. You left your dishes in the sink again. Maybe they even bring kind of a tone to it. And the thought that we're going to start out with is, they think I'm a slob. And immediately we begin to kind of feel insecure. What are some of the emotions that might come from that? Maybe resentment towards that other person, insecurity, defensiveness. And the actions is we point out their flaws and we start an argument. And the results is an argument and probably some broken dishes as well, maybe against their scalp. So there's a new story though. We have, again, same circumstance, asked to clean the dishes, still with a little bit of a tone, not helpful, but we can tell a different story. What if instead we say, this person cares enough to speak up? They could have just held it within. They could have just resented me for the rest of the day and been ticked off, but they care enough about the relationship to be vulnerable and let me know that they were upset by my lack of cleanliness. So again, that's just one story that we can make up, and the feeling might change to appreciation, gratitude, and understanding for what this other person might be going through. The action would be, you're like, okay, cool, start cleaning your dishes, and maybe you even feel compelled. Again, the menu changes. When the feeling changes, the menu of actions before us changes. And we become aware of, maybe we'll ask about their day. Because we're in a different feeling state, different actions become available to us. So we ask about their day, and it shifts the whole energy of the room. And the result, we've got peace, empty sink, and maybe a makeout session, if things go well. Because we all know emotional intelligence is an aphrodisiac. So maybe, I don't know. Just a quick, this is a quick thought experiment because I don't want us to fall into binary thinking where you are either going to think negatively or you're going to think positively. That's duality, that's either or, that's 1 or a 0. But the reality is you always have more options than you realize. You always have more what? Options. Yeah, so good. You're all so good. So, for example, the thought might be, I want to be responsible. They say, you forgot to clean up your dishes in the sink. Maybe the thought is, oh, well, that's not in alignment with who I want to be. The mentors that I look up to, the podcasts I listen to, those people, I imagine that they clean up after themselves. At least that's my fictional idea of them on a pedestal. And I want to be that kind of person. I want to be the kind of person who cleans up after themselves. And so, again, the emotion might be, a healthy sense of pride, productivity, responsibility, and the actions change because of that. Maybe this is a form of meditation. Hey, you forgot to clean your dishes. Oh, here's an opportunity for me to be present. And I'm going to breathe deeply at the sink. I'm going to feel the water running over my hands, and I'm going to be grateful that I'm alive, that I have senses and the ability to move my hands. And that's a totally different interpretation. Another one might be, I'm so grateful to have dishes. Again, there's so many options that we have. These are just 4 that have come up for us. So let's get a little meta. Meta is basically just kind of when you become aware. Deadpool is a superhero known for being very meta. He breaks the fourth wall, talks to the camera, talks to the audience. So let's just kind of step out and become aware of what we're doing here today. So imagine stumbling through a dark room. The lights are totally off. There's furniture in front of you, and you don't really know where you're going. You keep tripping over furniture. Now, if we were to go the route of a strategy, I could write an ebook on 17 ways to avoid furniture in the dark. Number 3 will blow your mind. And you could study that, and it may have some practical tips, like using your hands before, or taking baby steps as you go. And there'd be all these strategies that you could try to avoid hitting the furniture in the dark. Or I could just turn on the light, and you'll naturally see more clearly. You'll avoid the furniture on your own. You don't need an ebook because you see more clearly now. You'll stop stumbling over the furniture. So that's what we're doing here today. You're not going to walk away with 5 tips on how to be more mindful, but you're going to become more aware of how your mind operates. It's a lot like you're becoming aware today and continuing forward on the fact that you're wearing glasses. And what if you suddenly, your whole life, you didn't know that you were wearing glasses? And all of a sudden you realize, oh, I'm staring through lenses. And these lenses have shades and colors and cracks and blemishes. And today we're simply practicing becoming aware of the glasses. So that's kind of the difference between there's strategy and then there's insight. And today the goal is for us to simply become more insightful people. And it should change everything else that we do. So how do we practice this? Well, it's a great question. My throat's a little dry. Yeah, thank you so much. Beautiful. How you all doing? Good, good.
Now you can drink from my cup.
Oh, yes, thank you. Beautiful. That was pre-planned. That's why I paused, just for that joke. Okay, so how do we practice this? There's a lot of different ways. The practice is basically, it's noticing. You can apply this model to any different situation, any different circumstance in your life. But here's what's really helpful. This is what has helped me. This is like cream of the crop, that emotions are the warning light. Emotions are the warning light. So whenever we feel an intense emotion, that's our signal to stop and become curious about what story we're telling. So the mission is sacred, but the method is not. So most of the best spiritual practice, I'm going to phrase this, daily life is a much better spiritual practice than retreating into the mountains. So you will have far more opportunities to become aware of the stories you're telling simply going through your day, interacting with people in your life, than you will if you retreat into a mountain. And that's a beautiful thing. Meditation retreats are wonderful. But you will be far more challenged living an everyday life. And that's really where you get most of the practice. So again, the mission is sacred, the method is not. So you're going to get most of your practice just in daily life. But if you want to dedicate some time, meditation is a great practice. That can take on many forms. I like to think of meditation as, well, first off, doing nothing. So you might be sitting down, you might be lying down, maybe you're going for a walk. But it's turning off the input and turning off the output. So there's no input and there's no output. You're not receiving anything, you're not creating anything. You're just being in that space, the space between the input and output. You're just existing, you're being. And so, and from that place, that's where a lot of that wisdom kind of rises for us. We can't always predict when we'll have an insight, you know, when something will occur to us. Like, I didn't even know I was telling that story about myself. I didn't even know that I was doing X and it was getting me Y. We can't control when that happens, but it's a lot like we can't control when a bus will show up. But if you want to catch a bus, you should probably hang out at a bus stop. Meditation, getting quiet, journaling, going for a walk, these are the bus stops. So we can't always predict when wisdom or insight will come to us, but these things are like hanging out at the bus stop. We're going to be a lot more likely to notice things about our life. So anyways, fun thing. So again, emotion should lead us to curiosity. If you're taking notes, this would be one. For sure, emotion should lead us to curiosity. The next time you're feeling an intense emotion, that's a perfect time to become cognizant of the story that you're telling. So you feel uncomfortable, maybe somebody accuses you and you're like, ugh, I don't like how I'm feeling right now, I'm feeling stressed. Think of it as the woo, 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 that's the warning sign. Not that it's a bad story you're telling, not that it's a bad emotion, it's simply, if the sound is too off-putting, you know, you can just think of like a silent light flashing, you know, like in a recording studio. It's just something kind of in the background of like, hey, pay attention. You're invested in your story right now. And so the more intense our emotion is, the more intensely we are believing that story. So it's just something to become aware of. So emotion should lead us to curiosity. Practice makes present. So what does this look like as we grow in the skill in our life? And I was talking to somebody the other day about this. I forget, it was someone from the company, so if it's you and I forgot you, I still love you a lot. So we were kind of talking about how it becomes, it might have even been Eloisa, I don't know, but we're talking about how it becomes more regular for us to notice this. It was Eloisa. How we practice this. You start by noticing, it'll be delayed at first, that's what I'm trying to say. It'll be delayed. You'll react, and then all of a sudden, you know, a couple days later, you'll realize, oh my gosh, I totally got caught up in that story. Like I said that thing that I totally regret because I was feeling emotional, and I was feeling emotional because of that thought that they disrespect me, or I'm unsafe there, or X, Y, and Z. And we'll simply notice how the model is playing out in our life, but it'll be delayed at first. But practice makes present. So the more we do this, the more we become aware, next time it'll only be a day later. And we'll be like, oh, yesterday I totally got caught up in that. That circumstance led to a thought, or didn't lead to a thought. I made up a thought about the circumstance, which led to a feeling. You get the idea, and soon it will be, we're getting some kind of action. Yeah, if you're everybody online, if you want to go ahead and mute, because what I have to say is very important. It's okay. It's the beauty of technical difficulties. We're here. It's great. So let's use this. So the circumstance is we're having some technical difficulties. The thought might be, oh no, it's not going perfectly. They're going to see that me and my life is imperfect, that I'm flawed, and they're going to throw tomatoes at me. And the emotion is nervousness or fear, as the desire to disconnect, and leads me, the action is maybe I talk more faster and I get caught up in my head, and the result is I'm less present to be here with you all. And the result might be, you know, there's a disconnect between us. Different thought might be, how fun. This is such a usual thing that happens all the time in presentations, and we get to do it together, and it's an opportunity for me to make some jokes and use it and be present, and I'm so glad this happened. Totally different emotion that, you know, you just saw in front of you. So it's magic. Okay, so practice makes present. Yeah, soon, eventually, the more you practice this, and again, these ones over here, these can help. These will help speed up the process. They're not mandatory, but they are shortcuts, or they are the rainbow path in Mario Kart. You know, you hit those and you're gonna fly faster. That's what these are. They're not necessary, but they are very helpful. And they're going to help speed up the rate at which you begin to notice the stories you're telling. And yeah, so eventually you'll catch yourself in the middle of a conflict. You'll catch yourself in the middle of getting caught up in this world of thought. And story is so important. We need story. We use story to make sense of the world. Millions of years ago, no, not millions, a couple 100,000 years ago, about 10,000 years ago, whatever. Humans weren't around millions of years ago, not yet. But a long time ago, we began making up stories about, we saw a storm in the sky and we said, Zeus is mad. We should sacrifice a goat. And that was the story that we made up. And, thousands of different examples of stories that we've made up in history. And it happens to us today because that's how we understand our world. Stories help us understand what's happening. So the more we practice this, the more we will become present. And it'll become easier and easier and easier, and it'll become your default setting. Instead of, whenever you become emotional, instead of getting lost in the story, your new default will be to become curious. Again, this is so helpful. I love icons. I love symbols. Shutterstock.com. Thank you. Great, so this is a highlight reel. So let's just talk about what we learned about. Exposure is different than mastery. Remember, just because you've heard something doesn't mean you've explored all the possibilities before. So let's stay curious. CTFAR, cover thy, circumstance, thoughts, feelings, actions, and results. Emotions are the warning light, and emotion should lead us to curiosity. Any questions? Thank you all for being here today. Appreciate it. You may clap now. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you. You're all so wonderful. So wonderful. Any questions? I think we have some time left, right?
I do have a question.
Yes.
Can you touch again on the practice makes present?
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to repeat her question. She said, can I talk a little bit more about how present makes practice? Practice makes present. Yeah. I think it's so easy for us to beat ourselves up if we can't do something perfectly. So the tendency that we'll have now is to simply, there we go, is to, the next time you notice this, you might feel tempted to beat yourself up about it. Like, I got caught up in that emotion because of that story, or it took me too long to even notice. I can't believe I got emotional because I made up that story. Or even in meditating, so often we'll beat ourselves up as soon as we get distracted in our thinking. But the reality is, returning is the practice. Noticing is the practice. So every time that you notice, that's a win. It's not about getting it perfectly, it's about practicing. It's about turning this into a life skill that you develop over time. I guarantee you, because of the seeds that we're planting today, in 20 years from now, you will be far more aware of your inner world than you are today. And what we've simply done today is we've taken the first step in a journey. For some of us, if we've been on this journey for a little while, we took another step. One analogy I found helpful once in a book club I was in, a gentleman shared, because there was a lot of sharing as well. It was kind of a therapy, but also a book club. And he said, sometimes when we share something, when we open up, it's like removing a thorn. And we just needed to express it. We just needed to get it out. What that might look like for here is sometimes we just needed to become aware of that one story of, oh my gosh. We'll have those profound moments where there's some fundamental belief like, I totally thought that it was, like we talked about, the idea that you can feel something and take action in spite of the feeling. For some people, that's fundamental. That's like removing a thorn. And that's a big difference. But other times, it's just like taking a step forward along the path. So sometimes noticing is, I got upset when that person said something I didn't like. But you'll need to take that step again and again and again and again. So sometimes noticing is as profound as removing a thorn. You do it once and it makes a giant difference. But sometimes it's just like taking one more step forward along the path. And both are beautiful. But I do want to, is there anything specific you were still curious about?
I just wanted you to repeat that part where, like, sometimes you notice, like, a month after.
Yes.
And then, because I thought that was very strong, and I want to repeat it.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So, yeah, sometimes you will. Oh, yeah. So she was wanting to hear more about the process of how we begin to notice and how this becomes more usual. So, yeah. First off, it'll take a little bit. You'll notice it'll be a month out, and then it'll be, maybe a week later. But the hope is that eventually we become more present. This is the way that I like to think about it. The frequency, intensity, and duration changes. So the frequency of us getting lost in our thinking happens less often. The intensity of us getting caught in our stories reduces. So we don't get so caught up in our thinking, and the duration decreases as well. So we stay caught up in our fictional stories for less time. We become quicker to respond. So just know that not only will you, basically I should have had a whole slide for frequency, intensity, and duration. I think that is really a good description of what happens as we become more aware of our stories. The frequency changes. You become less aware. For those of you taking notes, I'll repeat it one more time. The frequency changes. You get lost in your story less often. The intensity changes. You don't get so caught up in that story you're telling. You don't become so emotional. Again, emotions are beautiful, but the more aware we are, the more we can channel those emotions. We can choose whether we want to be invested in that story or not. So the intensity changes and the duration changes. It'll take us less time to wake up to the fact that we're living in our thinking. So does that help? Beautiful. Okay. Right on. Any other questions? Yeah, anybody online? Mom? No, I'm just kidding. My mom's not kidding. What's that?
Hugs and kisses from Becky.
Oh, Becky. Hugs and kisses right back at you.
I got a question for you, Austin.
Yeah, Drew.
What's one thing you're working on materializing in your life right now?
Materializing.
Or manifesting?
Yeah. I'm working. Drew asked, what's one thing I am working on, manifesting, materializing in my life right now? I'm putting a blog together, and I'm really loving that process of creating a platform where I love thinking out loud. So writing, putting this presentation together, creating this helped me solidify a lot of these ideas for me. And so I just love the practice of expressing in order to understand an idea. If you want to understand something, try teaching it. It's a great practice. So that's something I'm bringing into existence. It's a platform to share the ideas that have helped me so far. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. So good. All right. Thank you. Thank you for being here. Love you all. Give it up for Lisa.